On behalf of the ICD, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Seth Schindler. Thank you for coming. Cultural diplomacy aims to resolve conflicts between nations and to promote peace. In your own words, what does cultural diplomacy mean to you?
I should start by saying that I'm an urban geographer and I'm interested in the transformation of cities. And usually I look at political economy and relationships within cities among people, the state, and so on. So when I think of cultural diplomacy, I would think of it in relationship to those topics. Now, cities in the global south are transforming extremely rapidly. We're talking about Africa here at this symposium. African cities are undergoing rapid transformation. So, in that context, how do we think of cultural diplomacy? And I guess the question for me is how can nation states such as Germany, other governments around the world, engage African cities? I think of diplomacy, I guess, in a very broad sense, in a way that engages all of the communities that are involved in this urban transformation. Because it's not just firms and the government, right? You have a multi-layered society, very complex societies. And as I said in my presentation, you have places that somehow they're related to the city, but they're not exactly what people think of when they think of the city. So Makoko is a great example because it's home to hundreds of thousands of people, and yet it's not what people think of when they think of Lagos. But does that mean it's not part of Lagos? I would say, on the contrary, it's an integral part of the city. So how then, in the context of urban transformation, can places like Makoko be engaged rather than simply building another Eco Atlantic? And this is the main question, and whether that's through, I think it will be through a variety of modes: cultural diplomacy, investment, foreign direct investment flows, and so on and so forth. But it's more of a challenge rather than giving you a simple answer, because I don't think there is one. But that's how I think of diplomacy then.
What role do you think cultural diplomacy plays in urban transformation, and how important is this role?
I think, unfortunately, oftentimes when we tend, or maybe not we, but oftentimes diplomats or the diplomatic community tends to essentialize a singular notion of a place and a people. So again, if you think of, let's say you think of Kenya, you have then a very kind of particular notion that you think of Kenya, of Kenyan people, and of Nairobi, which does not then take account of Kibera, most likely, right? And I think that, but Kibera's transformation, it's transforming, it's got a lot of energy, and this place cannot be ignored in the context, or in the processes of urban transformation, which I think oftentimes it is. So, for example, the place that the example I showed from Medellin, you've got this cable car that somehow tries to connect this type of place, which would be peripheral, would be outside of the kind of Medellin that most people think of in the diplomatic community when they think of Medellin. That's the question. And how can, whether it's through cultural diplomacy or through infrastructure, there are many ways, but how can these places be tied in to the city in ways that benefit the people living there, not just in the case of township tourism, in which case I question the extent to which people in townships benefit, but how can these communities be engaged with meaningfully? That would be the question.
In your view, do you believe that urban transformation or urbanization is sustainable in Africa, considering the fluctuation of the economy in many African countries?
Well, sustainable, I don't know what we mean by that, because whether or not it will happen, it will always happen. There's no city that will stay the same. New York is not a finished project, right? It changes every day, and African cities are likewise very dynamic. The extent to which this current direction of transformation, I would say there's a kind of what I described in my speech, this emphasis on territorial transformation. The extent to which that will continue, that's an open-ended question. At the moment, there are investors lining up to transform African cities, whether it's the Chinese government or PNB Paribas you've got investors from all over the world who are willing to invest in the transformation of African cities. How sustainable that stream of investment is, I think only time will tell. But for the moment, I would say that we will continue to see in the medium term rapid transformation of urban metropolises, African metropolises.
Yeah. And following up on that,
Yeah.
recently in 2012, though, South Africa introduced the How Train. And I
Yeah.
think that supports everything that you're saying. How do you think this kind of shows promise for the future of Africa and transport, and having that option to kind of travel quickly to places and kind of creating
Yeah.
those ties? However, it is South Africa though, which is more.
It's a bit of an outlier, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the Gautrain is a very interesting example, and
Yeah.
I'll say two things about it. It does stop in Alexandra. I think it's a township, very interesting. So it doesn't, but that's the only township it stops in, and I'm not sure if that's a good record or a bad record of tying places that were a bit peripheral, say former townships, into the circuits of the region. So it bypasses many other townships, and the people living in Soweto, I guess they pretty much have been unaffected by the Gautrain.
Yeah.
So I think it has a mixed record. I do think what's very interesting is that if I ride the Gautrain, I am probably, as a white male, there are probably, the population of people riding the Gautrain is representative more or less of the people in that region. And I think this does show that it provides access to a wide variety of people. It's not really a segregated infrastructure.
Yeah.
Maybe it is economically.
Yeah, that's the one thing. It is a little bit pricey.
Yeah. But you see the Rainbow Nation when you get on to the Gautrain.
Yeah. And I think because it's so new, of course it will be expensive, but, as more kind of developments happen, maybe, prices will obviously go down as it continues to develop. So I think, as you said, it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're seeing a current trend of gentrification occurring throughout Europe. For example, in London with Shoreditch, or even in Berlin, with certain areas. Is the same phenomenon, in your opinion, happening in Africa? Are residents being pushed out due to rising prices?
Well, I think we have to be a little bit careful with the word gentrification. So to me, the way I understand it is that you have a kind of industrial city where, probably industry collapses. Let's take Detroit or Baltimore as examples. And so the property value becomes quite low, and then that gives investors kind of the incentive to go in and invest, and then transform this place, this landscape, from an industrialized one to a post-industrial one. So you think of the Docklands in London and so on. I don't think that that's what we're seeing, because in many cases you're not seeing the transformation of industrial space in in Kenya, in Maputo. You don't see the transformation of a formerly industrial space into post-industrial space.
Absolutely.
However, so I choose not to use the term. Instead, I think objectively we can say that there's dramatic urban transformation, and I prefer that transformation rather than gentrification.
Yeah. A lot of people use South Africa as an example of this. Do you think it's a good kind of example of the rest of Africa? A lot of people assume that is the main component of Africa. Do you think it is representative of the rest of Africa, or not so much?
I don't think any one country in Africa is representative of Africa. So that's, of course, South Africa is not, but neither is Congo, neither is Tanzania. I think the one place where you might see gentrification strictly defined is parts of South Africa, where you see the transformation of an industrial landscape into a more post-industrial one. But no, in short, is South Africa representative of Africa?
Yeah.
No, but neither is any other country.
Because a lot of people who don't know as much, about Africa, they always seem to look to South Africa as kind of a representative. So I was just wondering your opinion on it. But I agree. I think you can't look at South Africa and assume that the rest of Africa is like
Indeed,
that. Yeah, with anything. But yeah. But anyways, we would like to thank you on behalf of that institute for being here today. Very fascinating speech, and thank you so much for taking the time to answer questions with us.
Thank you so much.
We look forward to hopefully maybe seeing you again before you go
Thank
over
you.
to England.
Thank
It was my pleasure.
It was very nice to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being
Bye-bye.
here.
Thank you.
Thank you.